The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945 remain among the most consequential events in human history. In an instant, these bombings not only led to the end of World War II, but also altered the very nature of global warfare. It was an event that ushered in the age of nuclear weapons, shifting the balance of power and changing forever the ways nations approach conflict. This video will explore the full scope of those bombings, not just in terms of military history, but from a human perspective, looking at the survivors, the moral questions raised, and the lasting legacy of these tragic events. We'll dive into the scientific breakthroughs that made the bomb possible, the difficult choices made by the leaders at the time, and the ethical dilemmas that still haunt us today. Along the way, we'll question the decisions made, examining alternative scenarios, and drawing lessons that can shape our future. In the early 20th century, the discovery of nuclear fission opened a new chapter in scientific achievement. Scientists like Albert Einstein and J. Robert Oppenheimer had no idea just how far their discoveries would go. Their theories and experiments became the foundation for the Manhattan Project, a top-secret U.S. government initiative that aimed to build a weapon capable of unimaginable destruction. The Manhattan Project, which began in 1942, involved thousands of scientists and engineers working together in secret locations, including the Los Alamos Laboratory in New Mexico. The goal was clear: develop a bomb powerful enough to end the war in a single blow. But with such power came responsibility. The creators of the bomb, while excited by their breakthrough, could not help but feel a creeping unease. Were they creating a weapon to save lives, or one that would alter the course of humanity forever? The first successful test of the atomic bomb, known as Trinity, took place on July 16, 1945. The explosion was more powerful than anyone could have imagined, with a fireball rising into the sky and a shockwave that could be felt miles away. This moment in history was both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The bomb worked, but as Oppenheimer famously quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds." By the summer of 1945, World War II was drawing to a close in Europe. The Allies had defeated Nazi Germany, and Japan was the last holdout in the Pacific. However, Japan showed no signs of surrendering. The fighting had been brutal, with no end in sight, and both sides had suffered heavy casualties. Allied forces were considering a full-scale invasion of the Japanese mainland, which would likely cost hundreds of thousands of lives on both sides. In this context, the use of atomic bombs became a means to end the war swiftly. The decision to use the bombs, however, was not solely based on military strategy. President Harry S. Truman, along with his advisors, believed that using the bomb would save lives in the long run by preventing a costly invasion. Yet, this decision would spark a moral and ethical debate that continues to this day. Was it worth it? The Japanese government had been seeking terms of peace, though not an unconditional surrender. However, the Allies were adamant about Japan's complete capitulation. Would dropping atomic bombs on civilian cities be the only way to force their surrender? On the morning of August 6, 1945, the first atomic bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, a city of 350,000 people. The bomb, codenamed Little Boy, was dropped by the B-29 bomber Enola Gay at 8:15 a.m. The explosion unleashed a force equivalent to 20,000 tons of TNT. The immediate impact was devastating. Buildings were leveled, fires raged, and tens of thousands of people perished in an instant. But the horrors did not end there. The survivors of Hiroshima, known as hibakusha, faced long-term suffering. Radiation sickness caused by exposure to the bomb's fallout took the lives of tens of thousands more in the months following the attack. In addition to the physical trauma, there was the psychological toll. Survivors dealt with the trauma of witnessing the destruction of their city, losing loved ones, and living with the scars of radiation exposure. Many questions arose in the aftermath. Why Hiroshima? Some argue that Hiroshima was a military target, home to key army facilities and an important industrial center. Others believe it was chosen to make a powerful statement to both Japan and the world about the United States' technological superiority. While Hiroshima's military importance is undeniable, the scale of civilian devastation cannot be overlooked. 3 days after Hiroshima, on August 9, 1945, the U.S. dropped a second bomb on Nagasaki, a port city known for its shipbuilding industry. The bomb, Fat Man, was a more powerful design than the one used on Hiroshima, and though it caused massive destruction, the city's geography, nestled between mountains, limited the bomb's full destructive potential. Despite this, Nagasaki was left in ruins, and the death toll was high. However, by this point, Japan was already considering surrender. Some historians argue that Nagasaki's bombing was unnecessary, as Japan's military leadership was on the verge of capitulating. Was the second bombing a calculated move to show strength? Or was it simply an inevitable part of a war that had escalated beyond reason? The bombings left lasting emotional and physical scars on those who survived. These survivors became symbols of the devastation, known as hibakusha, and many lived with serious health problems, including cancer, birth defects, and other illnesses caused by radiation. Beyond the physical suffering, the emotional and psychological damage was immense. In addition to the health problems, hibakusha also faced social stigma. Many were ostracized due to their illness and the fear of radiation. It was only years later that the full extent of the radiation damage was understood, and survivors were slowly recognized for the sacrifices they made. Yet, the stigma lingered, and many continued to suffer in silence. The question of whether the atomic bombings were justified remains a contentious issue. Proponents argue that the bombings saved lives by hastening the end of the war, while opponents see them as war crimes that targeted innocent civilians. The debate centers on whether dropping the bombs was a military necessity or whether alternative means, such as a demonstration of the bomb's power or a continued blockade, could have brought about Japan's surrender without the use of atomic weapons. At the time, Truman and his advisors justified the bombings on the grounds of military necessity and the desire to end the war quickly. However, historians and ethicists continue to debate the moral implications of using such a weapon, especially on civilian populations. Could the same goal have been achieved without the immense loss of life? Was the use of atomic bombs a step too far in the pursuit of victory? The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki left a legacy that shaped global politics for decades to come. The United States' use of atomic weapons led to the Cold War arms race, with both the US and the Soviet Union developing nuclear arsenals capable of destroying the world many times over. The potential for nuclear war cast a long shadow over international relations for much of the 20th century, leading to arms control treaties, the creation of international watchdogs, and ongoing efforts to prevent nuclear proliferation. Despite these efforts, the threat of nuclear conflict remains today. While no new atomic bombs have been used in warfare since 1945, the existence of nuclear weapons continues to influence global security dynamics. The fear of nuclear war, though somewhat diminished in the post-Cold War era, is still a real concern as tensions flare between nuclear powers. The bombings also left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the world. Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of peace, with annual memorials dedicated to the victims and the call for global nuclear disarmament. The message was clear: such destruction should never be repeated. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is not merely a historical lesson, it is a warning. It teaches us the dangers of unchecked power, the consequences of decisions made in the heat of war, and the profound cost of human lives. The lessons we take from this chapter in history are more important than ever in today's world, where the threat of nuclear conflict still looms. The question remains, can we learn from the past, or will we continue to make the same mistakes? The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki is a testament to the need for diplomacy, dialogue, and mutual understanding. The world must never forget the horrors of those bombings and the lessons they impart.